On November 20th, 2020, in Boksburg, Gauteng, a BMW was forced off the road by a white Ford Ranger. Two gunmen stepped out and opened fire. When the shooting stopped, one of South Africa's most powerful gang bosses lay dead behind the wheel. Ernie Solomon had controlled the Western Cape's abalone smuggling routes and drug networks for decades. His nickname meant troublesome in Afrikaans. He ruled through fear, taxing poachers and dealers, building an empire that stretched from Cape Town to Johannesburg. He survived an assassination attempt just months earlier. So why did this hit succeed when others failed? The answer lies not in who pulled the trigger, but in who sent Solomon to Boksburg in the first place. Ernie Solomon ran the terrible Joster street gang. He was also allegedly a former leader in the 28's prison gang, connecting him to one of the most structured criminal hierarchies on the Cape Flats. His power came from two sources: abalone and drugs. The abalone trade was his foundation. 90% of South Africa's poached abalone goes to Hong Kong and China, where it's prized as a delicacy. Solomon controlled the poaching operations in the Overberg region, particularly around Houston, a small coastal town where desperate fishermen harvest the illegal shellfish. His method was simple extortion. He taxed the Houston community on everything they took from the sea. Sources described him as operating like the Sheriff of Nottingham, demanding a cut of every abalone haul and charging R1 for every crayfish caught. The fees weren't voluntary. Solomon enforced payment through violence and intimidation. Poachers handed over their earnings because they were terrified. Some described him as taking their last cent. The taxation system was comprehensive and brutal. Solomon's enforcers monitored the coastline, tracking who went out to dive and what they brought back. Poachers who tried to hide their catch-faced beatings, or worse. Those who couldn't pay were forced into debt arrangements that kept them working for Solomon indefinitely. The system turned an entire community into unwilling employees of a criminal enterprise. Fishermen took the physical risks of illegal diving in cold, dangerous waters, while Solomon collected the profits with minimal personal exposure. But Solomon understood power requires more than fear. He cultivated a dual image. To outsiders and some residents, he was a community benefactor. He handed out food, paid for pensioners to visit the V&A waterfront on hired buses, and covered expenses for those in need. People called him a man with a heart of gold. This generosity wasn't kindness, it was strategic control. By filling the gap left by inadequate state services, Solomon positioned himself as the true authority in Houston. Residents who benefited from his charity stayed silent about his crimes. Many refused to speak to journalists. Those who did often defended him. The charity masked systematic exploitation. Solomon ruled Houston with an iron fist. His nickname, Lastig, reflected the fear he generated. He didn't just tax the poor, he robbed poaching operations outright when it suited him. The community's silence guaranteed his safety. Law enforcement couldn't secure witnesses or cooperation. Solomon's reign was built on a calculated balance: enough terror to enforce compliance, enough philanthropy to ensure loyalty. By November 2020, abalone prices had hit record levels, sometimes exceeding R$800 per kilogram. The value made control over Houston's smuggling routes crucial. After initial pandemic disruptions in China caused prices to dip, the market rebounded sharply. Solomon's empire was worth more than ever. But the higher the stakes, the more rivals wanted in. The abalone boom created pressure from multiple directions. Other gangs saw the profit Solomon was extracting and wanted their share. Younger members within his own organization questioned why the old boss should keep taking the largest cut. The traditional justifications for his authority, his history, his connections, his reputation, were losing weight against the cold mathematics of profit distribution. In an economy driven by drugs and smuggling, loyalty has a price, and that price rises with market values. Solomon's criminal activities extended far beyond abalone. The terrible Josters controlled drug distribution in parts of Cape Town. Solomon himself reportedly manufactured methamphetamine and trafficked other illegal substances. His network had established links across South Africa, including in Durban, Nelson Mandela Bay, and Gauteng. During the COVID-19 lockdown, he diversified into illicit cigarettes and alcohol, exploiting the banned trade. The geographic reach of his drug operation meant Solomon had to operate outside the Western Cape to protect his business interests. His subordinates managed distribution networks in other provinces, but when problems arose, Solomon handled them personally. In November 2020, one of those problems became critical. His henchmen lost a large consignment of Mandrax tablets to a rival gang in Gauteng. The value of the stolen drugs was estimated at R2 million. Mandrax, known as Quaaludes in the 1980s, remained a significant commodity in South African drug markets. Losing R2 million worth represented a major operational failure. For Solomon, the theft wasn't just a financial hit, it was a challenge to his authority. If word spread that rivals could steal from him without consequence, his control would erode. He needed to recover the consignment or make an example of those responsible. The drug trade operated on reputation as much as force. Solomon's power rested on the perception that crossing him brought swift, brutal retaliation. The stolen Mandrax consignment tested that perception. If he failed to respond, other subordinates might see weakness. Other rivals might attempt similar thefts. The entire structure of his national network depended on maintaining credibility. Every dealer, every distributor, every courier needed to believe that betraying Solomon meant death. So Solomon traveled to Boksburg, east of Johannesburg, to pursue the stolen drugs. The decision placed him far from his territorial stronghold. In the Western Cape, Solomon moved with layers of security. Houston residents, coerced or loyal, provided early warnings. His network of associates tracked potential threats. In Gauteng, those protections disappeared. He was in unfamiliar territory, pursuing a debt from people who had already crossed him. The economic imperative of the R2 million loss created a tactical vulnerability. Solomon's need to personally address the theft meant traveling to a location where his enemies could track him without the interference of his Cape Town security apparatus. The Boksburg trip wasn't random. It was forced by the stolen consignment, and someone knew he'd be there. While Solomon's drug empire created the tactical opportunity for his assassination, the motive came from much closer to home. His nephew, Horatio Vudi Solomon, represented the primary internal opposition within the terrible Josters. The conflict between uncle and nephew was rooted in a power struggle, but it became a blood feud on March 15, 2020. On that day, gunmen attacked Horatio outside his home in Durbanville, Cape Town. The hit was widely attributed to orders from Ernie Solomon. Horatio survived, sustaining head and chest wounds. His 13-year-old daughter was killed. The murder of a minor family member crossed a line that even in the brutal world of gang warfare is rarely breached. It transformed the dispute from a typical organizational power struggle into something personal and irreversible. Horatio had survived. His daughter had not. Compromise became impossible. The killing of Horatio's daughter violated fundamental codes. Criminal organizations, even violent ones, typically recognize boundaries around non-combatants. Children, elderly family members, and those uninvolved in the business are generally considered off-limits. These unwritten rules exist for practical reasons. They prevent conflicts from spiraling into total warfare where no one is safe. When those boundaries are crossed, the response becomes existential. Horatio's quest for revenge wasn't about business or territory, it was about blood. The attack provided Horatio with the ultimate justification for seeking external assistance to dismantle his uncle's empire. Gang violence often follows certain unwritten rules. Targeting non-combatant family members, especially children, breaks those rules and creates blood debts that can't be negotiated away. Horatio's need for reprisal made him an ideal collaborator for anyone seeking Ernie Solomon's elimination. His personal motive aligned perfectly with the strategic interests of rivals looking to consolidate control over the terrible Josters' valuable assets. 2 months after his daughter's death, on May 11, 2020, Solomon was targeted in Houston. Gunmen opened fire outside one of his businesses. Solomon survived 5 gunshot wounds, his son was injured, and 1 person was killed. The attack was believed to be retaliation for the hit on Horatio, or possibly linked to another conflict Solomon had with Ralph Stanfield, another powerful figure in the Western Cape underworld. Solomon's survival in May demonstrated the difficulty of eliminating him on his home turf. Houston was his territory, security was tighter, loyalists provided protection. The failed attempt showed that taking Solomon down in the Western Cape would be extremely difficult. But if he could be drawn out, caught in unfamiliar territory with reduced protection, the equation changed entirely. The failed Hostin assassination taught his enemies valuable lessons. Direct assault in his stronghold wouldn't work. Solomon's network was too entrenched, his security too thorough. Any future attempt would need to exploit a moment of vulnerability, preferably far from the Western Cape where his intelligence networks operated. The May attack also confirmed for Solomon that threats were real and immediate, yet he continued operating driven by the demands of maintaining his empire. That combination, heightened threat awareness coupled with operational necessity, created the conditions for his eventual death. Ralph Stanfield was consistently identified as a dominant figure in the Western Cape underworld. He allegedly led a specific organized crime group known as the 28s. This group was distinct from, though shared the name of, the long-established 28s prison gang. Stanfield's 28s were influential members of a broader 28s alliance which incorporated multiple street gangs, including the Terrible Josters under Solomon's leadership. The alliance structure was complex. It allowed multiple power centers to operate under a shared banner. This provided territorial and operational flexibility, but also created conflict when commercial interests diverged. Solomon's Terrible Josters and Stanfield's 28s group were theoretically allies within the same alliance. In practice, they were rivals competing for control of the same illicit markets. The 28s alliance functioned like a criminal federation. Member gangs maintained autonomy over their specific territories and operations, while coordinating on larger initiatives like smuggling routes or drug importation. The structure provided benefits: shared intelligence, mutual protection against outside threats, and collective bargaining power with suppliers. But it also created inherent tensions. Each member gang wanted to maximize its own profits and territory. When opportunities arose to absorb a rival's assets, even an ally's assets, the temptation was significant. Stanfield's alleged role in the assassination was strategic rather than personal. Shortly after the hit, suggestions emerged that a powerful Western Cape gang boss, a former associate of both Solomon and the late Rashid Staggy, had orchestrated the murder. The implicit identification pointed to Stanfield. His objective was consolidation of organized crime interests. By turning some of Solomon's men against him, Stanfield could execute a tactical strike aimed at extending his control over the valuable networks and territories held by the Terrible Josters. This strategic co-option required an internal ally. Horatio Solomon, motivated by revenge for his daughter's death, fit perfectly. Stanfield provided the logistical coordination and financial backing. Horatio provided insider intelligence and legitimacy for the strike. The alliance between them was pragmatic. Stanfield wanted Solomon's empire. Horatio wanted Solomon dead. Their goals aligned. The method reflected a broader evolution in Western Cape gang politics. Hits against senior gangsters had become frequent by 2020, but the involvement of close family members or deeply entrenched associates ordering or carrying out strikes indicated a new dynamic. Insiders were now the greatest threat. The violence suggested a generational shift. Senior bosses like Solomon, who built their names in the 1980s and 1990s, relied on traditional structures and loyalty-based hierarchies. A younger generation, skilled in managing modern drug markets and broader illicit economies, was dismantling that old guard. These younger leaders utilized the superimposition of prison-based number gangs onto street gangs to forge extensive alliances throughout the criminal landscape. Their networks were broader and more flexible. They prioritized tactical, commercially driven alliances over traditional codes of loyalty or family ties. The pursuit of profitable illicit markets systematically overrode old bonds. This calculated shift allowed figures like Stanfield to effectively decapitate rival leadership and assert authority over valuable assets without engaging in protracted, direct turf wars. The generational divide wasn't just about age. It reflected fundamentally different approaches to criminal enterprise. The older generation built power through personal relationships, reputation, and demonstrated capacity for violence. They ruled specific territories with intimate knowledge of local dynamics. The younger generation treated criminal enterprise more like business, focusing on network efficiency, market exploitation, and strategic positioning. They were less interested in personal loyalty than in organizational effectiveness. This made them more willing to betray allies, eliminate mentors, and restructure power arrangements based purely on commercial logic. Ernie Solomon's assassination must be understood in the context of another killing that occurred less than a year earlier. On December 13, 2019, Rashid Staggy, the leader of the Hard Livings gang, was shot dead in Salt River, Cape Town. Staggy was a former associate of Solomon and one of the most prominent figures in the Western Cape underworld. His death initiated the violent reconfiguration that would eventually claim Solomon's life. The back-to-back assassinations of Staggy and Solomon confirmed that the established hierarchy was collapsing. A new generation of leaders was emerging, and alliances were being violently redrawn. The connection between the two killings wasn't coincidental. Both men represented the old guard. Both controlled valuable criminal infrastructure. Both were eliminated within a short time frame as part of a broader consolidation effort. Staggy's death sent shockwaves through the Cape Flats. He had been a dominant figure for decades, surviving previous assassination attempts and prison sentences. His elimination demonstrated that even the most entrenched leaders were vulnerable. The method of his killing, shot in Salt River in what appeared to be a planned ambush, established a template. High-profile targets could be eliminated in public spaces if the planning was meticulous and the execution swift. The pattern was clear. Power in the Western Cape underworld was being centralized. The methods were ruthless. Traditional gang codes, which might have protected senior leaders or restricted violence against family members, were disregarded. The new operators prioritized efficiency and control over loyalty. They were willing to use insiders, family members, and strategic betrayals to achieve their goals. The chronology of violence in 2020 illustrated how quickly the power struggle escalated. Staggy was killed in December 2019. Horatio Solomon's daughter was murdered in March 2020. Ernie Solomon survived an assassination attempt in May 2020. By November, Solomon was dead. Each event was connected. Each created the conditions for the next. The murder of Horatio's daughter guaranteed his collaboration against his uncle. The failed May assassination demonstrated the need for a different tactical approach. The stolen drug consignment provided the opportunity. On November 20, 2020, Ernie Solomon drove a BMW through Boksburg. He was far from the Western Cape, pursuing the R2 million Mandrax consignment his subordinates had lost. The choice of location was not accidental. Boksburg, east of Johannesburg in Gauteng, was geographically distant from Solomon's traditional conflict zones. His security apparatus, optimized for the Western Cape, was decentralized here. The familiar networks that provided early warnings and protection didn't exist in Gauteng. At an intersection, Solomon's BMW slowed. A white Ford Ranger cut across the road, blocking his path. Two gunmen stepped out. They wore balaclavas and carried rifles. Solomon realized what was happening. He tried to accelerate, but traffic boxed him in. The BMW bumped into the car ahead. The shooters opened fire, riddling the vehicle with bullets. Solomon was hit multiple times and died slumped behind the steering wheel. The execution was professional. It was carried out in broad daylight, involving a tactical vehicle block. The gunmen operated without panic or rush. After the shooting, they calmly returned to their vehicle and drove away into city traffic. The disregard for collateral damage underscored their focus on target elimination. A second man traveling with Solomon died from injuries. A woman and a baby nearby were wounded. The hit team's confidence in operating with impunity was evident. The location of the assassination exposed the operational risk inherent in high-level Western Cape gang bosses venturing into other provincial territories to enforce financial claims. While Solomon maintained a national criminal network with established links in Gauteng, his security was clearly inadequate outside the Western Cape. The Boksburg hit suggested sophisticated tactical planning, possibly involving collaboration between the Cape-based conspirators and local Gauteng criminal elements familiar with drug routes and logistical movements in the area. The timing was precise. Solomon's trip to Boksburg was necessitated by the R2 million drug loss. Someone knew he would be there. Someone had access to his movements and plans. The insider intelligence required for the hit pointed back to Horatio Solomon. As a member of the Terrible Josters and Ernie's nephew, Horatio had access to operational details. He knew when his uncle would be vulnerable. Paired with Stanfield's resources and coordination, the information became lethal. When police and paramedics arrived, Solomon was already gone. The driver of the car in front, shaken by the gunfire, had sped off, leaving the BMW to roll forward on its own. It drifted for nearly 100 meters before smashing into a pole. The assassination was complete. The most powerful gang boss in the Western Cape was dead, killed far from his home turf in a meticulously planned ambush. The Boksburg execution demonstrated how geographic vulnerability could be exploited. In Houston or Cape Town, Solomon moved with protection. His routes were known to loyalists who could warn of threats. His residences and businesses had security measures. In Gauteng, chasing stolen drugs, he was exposed. The hit team didn't need to infiltrate his stronghold. They simply waited for him to leave it. The economic pressure of the stolen consignment forced Solomon into their kill zone. Solomon's death created immediate uncertainty in the Western Cape underworld. His control over the abalone trade in Houston and the Overberg region was absolute. With him gone, multiple criminal entities saw an opportunity to seize those routes. Local residents feared increased violence would erupt as rivals fought to fill the vacuum. The economic stakes were enormous. Abalone prices had reached record highs by November 2020. Whoever controlled Houston controlled access to a multi-million rand trade. The fear was well-founded. The pattern established by Staggy's and Solomon's assassinations suggested that the consolidation wasn't finished. The younger generation of leaders, operating under figures like Stanfield, were systematically eliminating the old guard and absorbing their assets. The violence was commercially motivated. Traditional gang structures based on loyalty and hierarchy were being replaced by flexible, network-based alliances driven by profit. For law enforcement, the Boksburg assassination represented another high-profile failure. As of the available records, no confirmed arrests or successful prosecutions specifically for the November 20, 2020 murder have been made public. While other gang-related trials involving alleged 28 figures have occurred, direct legal accountability for the Boksburg hit remains absent from the public record. This lack of resolution reinforces the operational environment of impunity that allows these consolidation efforts to continue largely unchecked. The ability of organized crime leaders to be tracked and executed across provincial lines demonstrates the sophistication and logistical capability of the networks responsible. This operational superiority by criminal elements stands in sharp contrast to the visible failure of the South African Police Service and specialized units to effectively deter or successfully prosecute these high-level targeted killings. The fact that Solomon's assassination, a pivotal event in the criminal landscape, yielded no immediate justice underscores systemic challenges facing law enforcement. The terrible Josters, without their leader, faced an uncertain future. Horatio Solomon, motivated by revenge and allied with Stanfield, was positioned to claim a role in the reorganized structure. But the internal dynamics of the gang remained volatile. Testimony from former Terrible Josters members specifically implicated the triangle of Ernie, Horatio, and Stanfield, suggesting that the broader membership understood what had occurred. Whether they would accept Horatio's leadership or fragment further remained an open question. The power vacuum also created opportunities for external actors. Other gangs from the Cape Flats, seeing the Terrible Josters in disarray, might attempt territorial incursions. The Hard Livings, despite losing Staggy, still operated. The Americans, another major Cape gang, maintained significant influence. The Sexy Boys, Junkie Funky Kids, and numerous other organizations all competed for control. Solomon's death removed a major player from the board. The scramble to claim his pieces intensified competition across the region. Three factors converged to make Solomon's assassination possible. First, the internal blood feud. The murder of Horatio's daughter provided a powerful personal motive and justified seeking external help. Horatio's need for reprisal made him an ideal collaborator for rivals, seeking Ernie's elimination. Second, Stanfield's strategic ambition. His goal was consolidation of organized crime interests within the 28's alliance. By leveraging Horatio's insider knowledge and turning some of Solomon's men against him, Stanfield executed a calculated strike to extend control over valuable territories and networks. Third, the economic crisis. The R2 million Mandrax loss forced Solomon to travel to Gauteng, exposing him in a geographically distant, less secure environment. None of these factors alone guaranteed success. Solomon had survived the May 2020 assassination attempt in Houston. His security in the Western Cape, bolstered by local loyalty and operational familiarity, made eliminating him there extremely difficult. But the stolen drug consignment created a unique tactical window. Solomon's need to personally address the theft meant operating outside his stronghold. The Boksburg trip wasn't optional. It was forced by the economic imperative of recovering the lost consignment. The convergence was synergistic. The internal feud established the political climate and provided the motivated insider. The strategic consolidation goal provided the financial backing and logistical coordination. The economic crisis provided the singular tactical window. Without all three, the hit likely fails. The assassination wasn't opportunistic. It was the result of deliberate planning that exploited a specific vulnerability created by overlapping motives and circumstances. This method reflects a sophisticated approach to gang politics. Rather than engaging in a direct, protracted conflict for infrastructure absorption, Stanfield used tactical betrayal and strategic timing. The willingness to violate traditional gang codes, such as targeting family members, signaled a new ruthlessness. The use of insiders to provide intelligence demonstrated that loyalty-based structures were obsolete. The assassination of Ernie Solomon was a blueprint for how power would be transferred in the modern Western Cape underworld, through calculated violence, strategic alliances, and the exploitation of internal conflicts. The convergence also revealed vulnerabilities in traditional criminal hierarchies. Leaders like Solomon built empires on personal relationships and reputation. They assumed family ties provided some protection. They relied on geographic strongholds where local knowledge and loyalty created security. All of those assumptions proved fatal. Modern criminal networks operate with cold efficiency. They exploit any weakness, including family connections. They plan operations across provincial boundaries, neutralizing geographic advantages. The old model of criminal leadership couldn't adapt quickly enough. Despite the clarity of the motives, significant uncertainties remain. The most glaring is the absence of confirmed arrests or prosecutions specifically for the Boksburg assassination. While investigations presumably occurred, the public record contains no resolution. No suspects have been publicly identified. No trials have proceeded. The gunmen who executed the hit remain unknown, at least officially. The lack of justice is consistent with the broader pattern of gang-related violence in South Africa. High-profile hits, even those carried out in broad daylight with witnesses, often go unprosecuted. The sophistication of the criminal networks, combined with systemic failures in law enforcement, creates an environment where targeted killings can be carried out with minimal risk of legal consequences. Witnesses are intimidated or uncooperative. Evidence is difficult to secure. The coordination required to prosecute complex gang conspiracies often exceeds the capacity of under-resourced police units. Another uncertainty involves the precise dynamics of the abalone market in 2020. Conflicting reports emerged regarding price stability. Earlier information indicated a price drop due to COVID-19 disruptions in China. Later reports highlighted prices reaching record R$800 per kilogram by November 2020. Clarifying the exact market conditions is necessary to fully assess the immediate financial pressure influencing control battles in the Overberg. If prices were indeed at record highs, the incentive to seize Solomon's territory was even greater than previously understood. Finally, the long-term consequences for the terrible Josters and the broader 28's alliance remain unclear. Did Horatio Solomon successfully claim leadership after his uncle's death? Did Stanfield absorb the terrible Josters' assets entirely? Did the gang fragment into smaller competing factions? The answers to these questions determine whether the assassination achieved its intended goal of consolidation or simply created further instability. The assassination of Ernie Solomon wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a violent reconfiguration of power in the Western Cape underworld. The deaths of Rashid Staggy and Solomon within a year of each other confirmed that the established hierarchy was collapsing. The old guard, leaders who built their empires in the 1980s and 1990s, were being systematically eliminated by a younger, more ruthless generation. This new generation prioritizes commercial efficiency over traditional loyalty. They utilize broader networks, formed through the superimposition of prison-based number gangs onto street gangs, to create flexible alliances. These alliances are tactical rather than ideological. They exist to maximize control over profitable illicit markets, particularly the modern drug trade and transnational smuggling routes like abalone. When commercial interests diverge, alliances are dissolved through violence. The willingness to use insiders represents a fundamental shift. In traditional gang structures, family ties and long-standing associations provided some degree of protection. Leaders could trust their inner circles. The involvement of Ernie Solomon in his uncle's assassination demonstrates that those protections no longer exist. Insiders, motivated by personal grievances or strategic interests, are now the greatest threat. The erosion of loyalty-based structures makes every senior leader vulnerable. The geographic scope of the violence also signals evolution. Solomon's assassination in Gauteng, far from the Western Cape conflict zones, shows that criminal networks operate nationally. Rivals can coordinate hits across provincial boundaries, leveraging local contacts and resources. This national reach makes it nearly impossible for leaders to maintain absolute security. Even in their strongholds, they face threats from coordinated, geographically dispersed networks. For communities like Houston, the consolidation brings continued exploitation under new management. Solomon's death didn't liberate the town from criminal control. It simply transferred that control to whoever emerged victorious in the subsequent power struggle. The abalone trade continues. Poachers still face extortion. The fear that kept residents silent under Solomon's rule persists under his successors. The only difference is the name of the man collecting the taxes. The transition also affects how criminal organizations interact with legitimate society. Solomon's dual persona, feared gang boss and community benefactor, created a buffer between his criminal empire and civil institutions. His charitable acts, however cynical, provided cover and maintained community relations. Newer leaders may not invest in that social capital. Their approach is more transactional, focused on extraction rather than maintaining elaborate facades. This could intensify community opposition or, conversely, make resistance even more dangerous as the pretense of benevolence disappears. Ernie Solomon's assassination reveals how power is transferred in South Africa's organized crime landscape. It's not taken through direct confrontation or sustained territorial warfare. It's seized through strategic betrayal, insider intelligence, and the exploitation of tactical vulnerabilities. The convergence of personal vendettas, economic crises, and strategic ambitions creates windows of opportunity that sophisticated criminal networks exploit with precision. The impunity surrounding the killing reflects systemic failures in law enforcement. The South African Police Service and specialized units lack the resources, coordination, or capacity to effectively counter these high-level targeted hits. Criminal networks operate with a level of sophistication that exceeds the state's ability to investigate and prosecute. Witnesses are intimidated. Evidence is scarce. Complex conspiracies involving multiple actors across provincial boundaries require investigative capabilities that simply don't exist in many areas. The broader implications for the Western Cape are troubling. The violent reconfiguration of gang structures isn't producing stability. It's generating a cycle of retaliation and consolidation that will continue as long as the underlying economic incentives, profitable illicit markets like abalone and drugs, remain intact. Each assassination creates a power vacuum. Each vacuum triggers a new round of violence as rivals compete to fill it. The pattern repeats. For the communities caught in the middle, the violence is devastating. Innocent bystanders, like the woman and baby wounded in the Boksburg shooting, pay the price for gang conflicts they have no part in. Towns like Houston remain under criminal control, their residents exploited by whoever holds power. The fear that keeps people silent prevents any meaningful cooperation with law enforcement, ensuring that the cycle continues unbroken. Solomon ruled through a combination of terror and selective charity. His successors will likely employ the same methods. The violence that ended his reign won't end the exploitation. It will simply redistribute it. Until the state can effectively challenge the criminal network's operational superiority, offer genuine economic alternatives to communities dependent on illegal trades, and secure convictions in high-profile cases, the underworld will continue its violent evolution. And the next generation of gang bosses will rise, consolidate, and eventually fall, just as Solomon did, in a carefully planned ambush far from home. The assassination also demonstrates the limits of reputation-based power. Solomon's fearsome nickname, his decades of violent enforcement, his iron grip on Houston, none of it ultimately protected him. Reputation deterred challenges for years, But once rivals identified a strategic opportunity and tactical vulnerability, reputation became irrelevant. The younger generation understands this. They build power through networks and commercial control rather than personal mystique. They recognize that every leader is mortal, every empire temporary. The goal isn't to become invincible. It's to position yourself to exploit the next power vacuum when it inevitably appears. Solomon's death wasn't an anomaly. It was a demonstration of the new rules governing the Western Cape underworld, where loyalty is negotiable. Family ties provide no protection, and power flows to whoever plans most carefully and strikes most ruthlessly.